morning and namaste to all of you. Let's start the class with some prayers. Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Om Bhu Bhuva Swaha Tat Savitra Varenayam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat Asto Ma Sadgamya Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya Mrityorma Amritam Gamya Om Sahnavavatu Sahnabhunaktu Saviryam Karvavahi Tejasvi Navadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahi Om Shanti 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 Om. Okay, let's open our books of Mahabharata. Lord Krishna and Arjuna, they are in the Khandava Vana. And that's what we are studying. So the burning of the Khandava Vana. Roaring from his mouth of flames, Agni began to consume the Khandava Vana. The flashing between tree and tree, setting them ablaze like tinder sticks. In no time, the crescent Deva set half the forest alight. His hands were fire, his body, his hair, and his face. His breath spewed a yojan of white flames. He cried to Arjuna and Krishna, "Follow me. Not a bird, beast, or plant must escape. They are all evil spawn." So they wanted to get rid of the evil from that forest. They flashed along beside him in this supernal chariot, the white horses keeping up effortlessly with Agni's coruscating pace. They saw he had a careful plan how he would burn the forest, so no creature escaped from it. First, the fire guard flew around the hem of the Vana in a vast circle, setting alight all the outermost trees. The flames then licked in towards the heart of the Khanda in an ever-thickening ring. Agni roared his joy as the jungle caught and burned, and Krishna drove his chariot, quick as thinking, round and round the conflagration to make sure no beast escaped. But the birds of the forest flew up into the air to flee the inferno. Among them were vampire bats, big as wolves, and bigger pterodactyls, survivors from another age. No avian of these raucous swarms escaped. Like rays of light, Arjun's arrows brought everyone down, and they perished with the other wild denizens of the Khanda, shrieking as they burned. Having joined the ends of his ring of fire, Agni moved into the deeper forest. Flames of many colors, green, blue, red, and every shade of orange, licked at the trees and the grasses, setting the brooding darkness aglow. The roof of the jungle collapsed to the onslaught of walls of fire, and the sun broke in with a vengeance, and the wind fanning the flames. Agni blazed on, and the screams of the creatures of darkness rang above his roars, screams of not only of thousands of animals, but Rakshas, Pishats, Bhoots, Yaks, and Nags, as the flames found them. Slavering demon faces, revealed briefly in the sheet flames, dissolved with chilling howls and shrieks, as succubus and incubus, ghoul and goblin burned. For the rest, all the living fled deeper into the jungle. There was a stampede of evil species flying in panic with no hope of escape. The stagnant pools and slime-covered lakes, across which no breath of air had stirred a ripple for centuries, began to bubble and evaporate in viscid fumes that rose into Devlok. All their creatures, fish, crabs, and tortoises, perished. On high there was soon a commotion. The Devas flew to Indra, their king, and cried, "Is the world ending that Agni consumes the Khandava?" Indra peered down and saw the forest burning. He growled in annoyance, but this was not the first time Agni had tried to burn the Khandava. Indra summoned his stormtroopers of the air. Black clouds amassed in towering legions above the burning forest. As far as the eye could see, rumbling thunderheads filled the sky and grew dark as night. Agni cried, Indra knows the forest is burning. Here comes his storm. The sky was riven by a terrific streak of lightning. A clap of thunder shook heaven and earth. A terrific gale sprang up and howled through the trees. The throbbing clouds opened, and an impossible rain fell out of them. Agni howled. The rain was thick as arrows, each battering drop the size of a fist. At first, the blaze in the forest was so intense that Indra's downpour never reached the burning trees but turned to steam in the white heat. Indra, master of rain clouds, rode in the sky in a battery of thunder. At once, the clouds in the firmament were twice as dense. Pushkar and Avratak joined the fray, their lightning fiercer than anything so far. Now the rain from these clouds was as if a sea fell out of the heavens. Across the jungle, the leaping flames hissed and sputtered and began to die, doused by the flash flood from the sky. It was as if the apocalypse, Bhadav, which ends the world, had encountered the deluge, Pralya, in which time drowns. Agni hissed and screeched in frustration. The sky filled with billowing black smoke, cracked through the jagged lightning. Agni wailed, "Help me, Krishan! Arjun, help me now!" Arjun raised the Gandiv, and it was an arc of golden light in his hands. Krishan drove his white horses in a dream of perfect territory. Standing tall in the Rath, Arjun loosed a river of arrows at Indra's storm. The shining river held up the storm, so not a single drop of rain fell to the earth. Again, Agni's fire crackled and blazed, flames leapt up in exuberance, devouring trees and darkness. The Khandava burned like the fire from Shiva's third eye. The canny storm now tried to fall elliptically, to bend its way around the shield of arrows in the sky. Arjun turned his aim lower and in a moment enveloped all the one, top and sides, in an impenetrable dome. Agni's flames licked at this cupola. Indra's friend Takshak, the serpent's king, for whose sake the Deva protected the Khandav, was not in the jungle at all. Takshak's son Ashwsen was, and so was Ashwsen's mother. They slithered here and there in terror, seeing no way to escape. From above, Indra watched their plight. As the flames closed on them and heat grew unbearable, Ashwsen's mother cried to her son, "I will divert Arjun, and Indra will help you get away." Before Ashwsen could protest, his emerald mother, Taksha's queen of winged serpents, flew up as if to breach Arjun's dome of arrows. In a flash, Arjun brought her down with three livid shafts, her cry ringing in the burning air. At that moment, Indra loosed a deluge that breached the roof of the dome directly above Arjun's chariot. The water fell on him like a stone, and Arjun fainted. Before Krishan could revive him, Ashwsen had streaked out of the Khandav. He was the only creature of the forest to escape. Arjun cursed Ashwsen, "You have escaped your destiny like a coward. Your name shall be reviled through the ages." Agni and Krishan cursed that serpent as well. Furious that Indra had tricked him, Arjun now carried the battle into the sky. His astras came flaring into the Devlok, torn between pride that this Kshatriya was his son and anger that a mortal dared attack him. Indra loosed a Vavya Astra from above, a weapon of winds. 100 hurricanes came screaming down on Agni's forest fire. They blew out the tallest pillars of rain. As the Vavya Astra whistled around the Khandav, snuffing Agni's furnace, Arjun loosed a torrid Agniastra at the Vaiva. The screaming winds took fire themselves and lit the trees again. Agni sprang up joyfully, and now he paid tribute to his warriors. Some of his loftiest flames looked like Arjun, and some like Krishan were deep blue. Krishan drove the white chariot like light through the blazing forest. He held the reins in one hand, and with the other he hunted the creatures of darkness. the bhoots, prets, pishach, rakshas, and yaksh that infested the Khandava. He hunted them with his spectacle chakra, which desiccated spirits, goblins, and demons, and their cries echoed among three tall flames. Arjun shot three more fiery astras straight into the Devlok. Beside himself, Indra seized up his Vajra, the thousand-jointed thunderbolt, and started down with Amravati. He would teach these mortals a lesson. The other devas went before him, Yam with his glowing staff, Kuber with his dreadful mace, Skand with his lance of fire, Tvast with his mountain, Surya with his flaming dart, and Mrityu with his gleaming axe. A river of arrows from the Gandiv greeted them in the ethereal Aksha between heaven and earth. Then there was Krishn's chakra, wheeling everywhere, knitted and inexorable. Barring their way down, the devas fled back to Indra, crying, "There's no way past the mortals' weapons. These Kshatriyas are terrible. Who are they? They strike fear in us." Indra smiled inwardly, but he had to take a battle down to the upstart humans that dared put the devas of heaven to flight. Indra knew who Krishna was, that there was no standing against the avatar. Once, years ago in Vrindavan, he had suffered a humiliating defeat at the Blue One's hands. But Arjun's mettle was yet to be tested. Roaring above the storm, Indra plucked a jagged peak from Mount Mandar with hands of light, carrying it aloft perhaps to show Krishna it was not just he could bear mountains in the sky. The Deva king appeared before the Khandava Vana and hurled his missile down at the human warriors like a bolt of lightning. It flew down the sky, darkening the day, taking fire as it came like a comet. Quicker than seeing, Arjun turned his arrows at the peak of rock and ice. He smashed it into dust and scattered the dust everywhere in a fine rain. The planets wobbled in their orbits at Indra's roar. The king of the Devas raised his thunderbolt, made in forgotten times from a rishi's bones of adamant. He drew back his arm to cast the Vajra at Arjun when an Asriri spoke from the sky. Takshak is not in the Khandava Vana, and the jungle is fated to burn today. It was written among the stars before the earth was made, and nothing can save it. You have helped Ashav Sen escape. You can do no more. Arjun and Krishna are Narayan. No one can vanquish them. It is not natural for a father to fight his son. Stay your hand, Dev. Salvage some honor before they humiliate you completely. Indra lowered his Vajra. For a moment he sat very still on his white elephant, a Ravat treading air. Then he came down to the Khandav and stood before Arjun and Krishna in a scintillating form. The Kshatriyas climbed down from their chariot and folded their hands to him. Indra said, "Not all the devas together could have done what you both have. Ask me for any boon." Arjun quivered with excitement to see his father. He stood staring at the god of light. Indra said again, "Ask me for any boon, Kshatriya, and it will be yours." He looked at Krishna, who shook his head. Indra turned to Arjun, who fell at his father's feet for his blessing. Indra laid his palm on his son's head, then raised him up and embraced him. Yet again the Dev said, "I am proud of you, Arjun. Ask me for any boon." Arjun hesitated. He glanced at Krishna, who nodded at him. The Pandav cried, "Bless me with every astra you have power over." Indra threw back his illustrious head and laughed. "You will have all the astras you want, but not yet, my son. When Shiva gives you his own Pashupatastra, you will have my astras from me. So it is written, I believe, and so it shall be." He turned to the inscrutable Krishna. "Krishna, is there nothing you want from me today?" And Krishna said, "Let Arjun always be my friend through eternity." So be it. Indra raised his hand over them once more and vanished, as if he had been an illusion. Just then they heard a cry, a noble Asur. None they expected to find in this vile Khandava, but a great demon of the ancient race, tall as two men, came flying through the clearing where Arjuna and Krishna stood beside the white chariot. He ran with huge strides, his face twisted in a grimace, his dark eyes full of fear. Roaring after him flew Agni, man shaped again, but gigantic flaming arms outstretched to clasp the Asur and made him ashes. That Asur was Maya, demon builder and awesome genius who once made the Tripur in the sky. He had come to visit his friend Takshak. Agni had burned down the Serpent King's cave palace, and Maya fled through a back door with the fire guard in pursuit. When Krishna saw the fleeting Asura, he raised his chakra to take off the fugitive's head. Maya ran to Arjuna and cried, Arjuna, save my life. Strangely taken with the dark and magnificent being, Arjuna said, no one shall harm you. Krishna gave a shout of surprise, but he lowered his hand and the chakra vanished. Agni also turned away from Maya, sparing his life because Arjun had given him sanctuary. In a wink, the Asur escaped from the burning forest. Some say Agni burned in the jungle for a fortnight before the Khandava was raised. Others claim the fire god raged so fiercely he consumed the one before the sun set the same evening. Perhaps the truth was that the burning of the Khandava occurred in a subtler dimension of time and event, a transcendent zone. Anyway, all that was left of the evil forest was ashes, which the wind scattered across Bharatvarsha. The earth was an exercise of the sinister one and its evil creatures and spirits. Arjun now had the white chariot, the Gandiv, and the magic quivers that fate meant him to have for the war on the crack of the ages, which he must fight one day. His hunger appeased. With boundless animal flesh, to him nectarine rivers of blood, marrow and fat, Agni came back to Krishna and Arjun as the bright Brahman once more. He glowed now with the satisfaction of the ample meal, like a contented guest from a wedding banquet. He laid his hands, cool flames, in blessing on the warriors' heads. Agni said, today's feast would never have been but for you both, Krishna and Arjun. I bless you. May your most cherished dreams come true. They bowed to him with folded hands, and he too vanished before their eyes like mist before the sun. Arjun and Krishna were alone together. Exhausted by their adventure, they walked slowly to the river, dark now with the twilight. The last rays of the setting sun lit the few clouds that straggled in the sky like lamps at evening puja. Behind them in the jungle, livid embers still smoldered here and there, but otherwise all that day was like some dream. A breeze sprang up over the Yamuna, full of the scents of night blooming lotuses, and it blew the last wisps of smoke out of raised forest. It blew soft calm into the two Kshatriyas' tired limbs. The cousins washed in the river and offered Sandhya Vandan to the gods. Then they sat in silence on the roots of the stalwart Panag, where Agni had just first approached them. The god of flames had spared just that one tree, as if he had known they would want to sit under it after the forest had burned down. They sat listening to the midnight blue river murmuring by. Krishna said, it is time we return to the others. They would have seen the fire and heard the screams. They must be anxious for us. As they walked back leisurely towards the Kuru camp, they did not notice the tall figure that followed them at a discreet distance. Just before they arrived at the camp, a voice hailed them from the night, and the looming figure approached. So this is the end of the first chapter, which is called the Parva. So now the second chapter, Sabha Parva. Maya. You remember that looming figure, the tall figure was the demon Maya. He came out of the darkness as Krishna and Arjun walked wearily back to the Kuru camp near the Yamuna. They saw Maya, The Asura had recovered from the terror of Agni chasing him through the blazing Khandava Vana. Laying his head at Arjun's feet, he said, "You saved my life. Let me at least tell you who I am." "Who are you, friend, living in the Khandav?" asked Arjun. "I am Maya of the Asurs, and I was the architect of my people. I built the Tripura in the sky with the Shiva, which Shiva burned with his astra. I am in your debt, Kshatriyas. You must let me repay your kindness. Is there anything I can do for you?" They saw his skin shone in the falling night, and his great eyes were deep and honest. The language he spoke was chaste, of an old strain seldom heard in the world anymore, and a far cry from the crude dialects of the Rakshas of the day. He was a noble being from another time. Fascinated by Maya, Arjun said, "I am happy I could be of use to you, but I never take anything from someone I have helped. I am deeply in your debt. There must be something I can do for you, anything at all. You only have to name it. It is enough to have you for my friend. You must not feel obliged to me." However, Maya insisted, "I must show my gratitude or I will have no peace. It is no common favor you have done me. You have saved my life." In the gloom, Arjun saw the Asur's eyes glistened with the tears. Krishna knew something of Maya, and he was among the great Shiv Bhagats of all time, and a learned Asur to whom Surya Dev revealed the Surya Siddhanta, the secrets of the galaxy. The Dark One said softly to Arjuna, "He is noble and sincere. You must not disappoint him." In a moment, Arjun said to Maya, "Do something for Krishna here that will please me more than anything else." Maya bowed to the avatar. "What can I do for you, Lord?" Krishna grew thoughtful. He saw the germ of fate in that moment. He remembered the task for which he had been born: to remove the burden of evil from the earth, to destroy the power of the race of kings. He saw a vast battlefield heaped with corpses and a skin of blood congealing on it. Krishna felt dizzy for a moment. He sensed the chance to sow a cunning seed of envy and set the stage for an apocalyptic war. There were no accidents of circumstance. The appearance of Agni or Maya or the burning of the Khandav, Krishna saw fate's hand in the day's extraordinary happenings. He said to the Asur, "I have heard of your genius, Maya. Build a sabha for Arjun's brother Yudhishthir in Indraprastha. Let it be as wonderful as your own court was in the Tripura." They saw how Maya's eyes misted over at the mention of Tripura. He had been a great king himself, once, in time out of mind. Before Shiva's astra consumed his cities in the sky and his people, Maya said slowly, "My skill isn't what it used to be, and this age does not support true grandeur, but I will do my best." Krishna laughed. "I think the best you can do even today will be more than enough for us. But combine the finest styles of building known to the Devas, the Asurs, and to the men. Let your Sabha take inspiration from both ancient times and new. Let it be unique." Krishna paused. "Above all, Maya, let it be the envy of those who set eyes on it." Arjun looked startled, but Maya received this calmly. With a smile, the Asur said, "So it shall be, Dark One, and may it serve your purpose." Already images of a majestic Sabha for Indraprastha rose vividly in Maya's mind. How he had longed to create something visionary, but who would ask an Asur trapped in the wrong time, an age of humans, to build for them? And he was no longer a king of his people, that he could build a court for himself. Eagerly, he seized the chance to use his gifts once more. These were jealous and dangerous times, thought Maya. By now, he knew who the Blue One was. He would build just what Krishna wanted, a Sabha to be the cynosure of the world, a Sabha that would launch the greatest war of these times, a war to end a yug with and accomplish an avatar's mission in the world. Maya saw before his eyes floors paved with the pendant jewels, gleaming domes and towers, walls depicting timeless legends of the gods in great panels, friezes encrusted with rubies and diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, cornelians, and pearls like this age had never seen. He saw gold and silver employed subtly, tastefully, and the most resonant wood available in the jungles of Bharatvarsh. Maya saw all this in moments as a tide of inspiration swept away the cobwebs from his mind. They arrived at the camp to find the Kuru party had returned to Indraprastha. They rode back to the city in Varun's chariot swiftly as the night wind, bringing Maya the Asur with them. The guards at the gates shivered to see the darkly resplendent being with Arjun. They drove through the streets of Indraprastha and saw how appraisingly the Asur took in the sights of the city. They brought Maya to Yudhishthir, who rose to welcome the mysterious guest, whose presence was so mythic, so out of place in these times in which he did not belong. Maya's eyes smoldered with ancient fires. The Asur bowed deeply to Yudhishthir. O king, your brother has asked me to build a sabha for you in Indraprastha. I have accepted the offer as eagerly as a thirsty man does a drink of water, for I have not built anything since the Tripura was torched from the sky. He stroked a pillar near him appreciatively and let his eye rove over the hall in which they sat. Maya went on slowly. Vishwakarma has created a magnificent city for you. It will be an honor and a challenge for me to best my old rival in his own city and show that Maya is still the greatest builder. The others smiled. What did they know of that rivalry? They had not seen the wonder that had been the Tripura, triune, ineffable cities of the air circling the earth. He would create a sabha for them that would make the rest of Indraprastha seem ordinary. Why just the kings of the world? He would build Yudhishthir a court to make the devas envious. Maya spent a week studying Indraprastha and its environs before he decided on the site where he would erect his sabha. Dhamme was asked, and we all know that Dhamme is the Purohit and the priest of the Pandavas. Dhamme was asked to find an auspicious day for the construction to begin. He performed a puja on that day and chanted Vedic mantras to purify the site. The excavation began to lay the foundations like Vishwakarma. Maya worked with magical powers, but he believed in manual labor too. He knew the hard old ways always gave an edifice more depth and grace. Krishna came to Yudhishthir and said, I must leave for home. There is much to be done in Dwarka. Yudhishthir looked stricken. You are the star that guides our destiny. While you are with us, we are free with doubt and fear and see our way ahead clearly. Stay a while longer, Krishna. Bhim said shyly, we shall be lost without you. Sahadev whispered, when you go, it is as if our life leaves us. Nakul nodded agreement with his twin. Arjun was the most forlorn. Krishna insisted, if you need me, only think of me, and you will find I am with you always. For I leave my heart in your care, but I must return to Dwarka now. There are others who need me too. They sorrowing, and he beyond sorrow, Krishna bid farewell to his aunt and his cousins. One by one he embraced them. Last of all he came to Arjun and Subhadra. They were out in the sun now, and Daruk, his Sarathi, had brought Krishna's chariot to the palace steps. Krishna clasped Arjun to him, and the Pandav wept. Finally, the Dark One returned to Subhadra, embraced her, and said cheerfully, may I have my chariot back now? You remember this was the chariot they both drove from Dwarka to Indraprastha. Okay, Arjun and Subhadra. So he had a smile out of his sister, and then she also began to sob. The people of Indraprastha had filled the streets to bid farewell to the avatar. Yudhishthir said to Daruk, friend Daruk, we have a custom in Indraprastha that when Krishna leaves us, I drive him to the city gates, so allow me. Daruk got down from his place, and the king climbed up to the Sarthi's seat. Arjun and Bhim climbed into the chariot with silken chamars in their hands, and Nakul and Sahadev held the white parasol over Krishna and Satyabhama. They drove through the streets, and the people thronged the Rath in a sea, reaching out to touch the avatar. On their way to the city gates, they passed the site for the Sabha and saw Maya. He ran up and folded his hands to Krishna, who raised a hand in blessing over his dark head. They arrived at the gates, and still Yudhishthir drove the chariot. Like a man in a dream, he did not want to wake from and find his cousin gone. Krishna said, Yudhishthir, stop. You have a long walk back to the palace, and you are not dressed for walking. Reluctantly, the king obeyed. The Pandavas alighted from the chariot, and Daru climbed back on. The last time Krishna got down and embraced his cousins. Then he got into the Jatra again. And what is this Jatra? Jatra is the name for something which always leads to victory. So this is the name of that Rath, Jatra. And said, come Daruk, we must go or we will stand here forever. Going to the crestfallen Pandavas, the charioteer flicked his reins and his horses sprang forward, knowing they were heading home to the city in the sea. The Pandavas stood gazing after the chariot until it was out of sight. Still they stood on. Finally, Yudhishthir turned back and the others followed him in silence. In their minds, they followed Krishna's chariot all the way back to Dwarka. And their deepest thoughts remained with their blue cousin long after they had ceased to be aware of it. Soon after they were out of sight of Indraprasth, Daruk turned back to his dark master with a question in his eyes. Krishna nodded to him, and next moment the unearthly horses rose steeply into the air. And they flew the rest of the way to Dwarka with the wind in their faces. So that chariot could fly. Maya's Sabha. Day by day, Maya Sabha took shape in Indraprasth. He had brought expert craftsmen from distant parts to work on the edifice. They were silent men and mysterious, who preferred to keep to themselves. They built a colony of hutments around the sprawling site and ventured into the marketplace only to buy themselves food. They did not mingle with the people of the city. Maya was pleased that this was so. He felt it kept their minds on this task, which was an undertaking of inspiration. First, Maya erected a huge skeletal wooden dome. He shrouded it with the rough canvas to keep the sun, the wind, and the rain out. Below this dome, his men labored by day and often by night. Maya himself was one possessed as he plunged himself into the enterprise, body and soul. He ate little and slept less. Often in the night's last yam, just before dawn, he could be seen stalking the streets of Indraprastha, alone, talking to himself, talking bare some nuance of design. Rumor had it that at times Vishwakarma, who eagerly watched the progress of the Sabha, joined Maya during these nocturnal strolls to analyze some delicate problem of structure or aesthetics for hours. One day Maya came to Arjun, who was the only outsider he allowed under the covering dome. He said, when the Tripur burnt, I salvaged some precious things from the inferno and buried them under the Bindu Saras near Kailash and Menak. I want to use those treasures to embellish your Sabha. Arjun thought, how much more contented the Asur was since he had begun working. He was absorbed as if nothing existed anymore except his Sabha. Arjun said, what can I do to help you? Give me some men to go with me to carry back what I made. Arjun agreed readily, and Maya set out for the Bindusaras, lake of the water drops. Once, when at Bhagirath's long Paryatan, the Ganga fell in a starry torrent on the earth. No one could bear her awesome fall. She was arrogant that it would be the end of the world. Then Shiva stood up from the Himalaya, tall as the sky, and he caught the falling river in his jata and contained her at the root of a single strand of his hair. Ganga's pride was broken. Struggle as she would, she could not escape from Shiva's head. Bhagirath begged Shiva to let the river flow in the world for his ancestors' sake. The Lord released her drop by painful drop to flow as a blessing upon the earth and absolve men who bathed in her of their sins. Where Shiva released the rivers of the sky from his head, a lake formed, which belonged as much to heaven as the earth. It was on the shores of the Bindu Saras that the rishis Nar and Narayan once sat in tapasya. It was beside the same lake that Arjuna had sat in Dhyan. Beneath it, Ulupi had seduced him. One night of a full moon that illumined the Himalayan landscape like a mystic's vision, the Asur Maya arrived at the Bindu Saras with the men Arjun had given him. The lake lay like a sea before them. It was a still winter's night, a silvery day, and snow lay all around like white fire. Here and there, a thin film of ice covered the water. What is a night for men is day for the Asurs. As soon as he arrived at the Bindu Saras, though it was midnight and they had come a long way, Maya waded into the icy water. It was thousands of years since he was last here, but he swam unhesitatingly to the middle of the lake. His men sat watching, awed by the beauty of this luminous place, poised between Swarg and Bhumi. Maya paused a moment, quite near where Arjun had plucked the scarlet lotuses. He swam on with powerful strokes. The Asur seemed like some aquatic creature from another world. He was a strange one, all right. He had actually hardly said a word to any of the 50 men that had come with him. He seemed wrapped up in thoughts too deep to share, of times so different his companions could not have imagined them. They thought he was the loneliest being in the entire world, a derelict from another age, condemned to live in a diminished time. Yet, now in the midnight waters of the Bindusaras, the Asur seemed to come alive. He dived under the surface of the lake and was gone interminably. Then he broke water with a shout that shattered the primeval silence of the white valley. They are here, cried Maya. My treasures are still here. He held his hand up above his head. Something crimson and renicent shone in it like a piece of the rising sun. Maya swam fluently back to the shore. He showed them the object in his palm. It was a gigantic phallic ruby, a reverberant Shivling. Those men had never heard that. Among all Shiv Bhagats, Maya was among the very greatest. Briefly, the Asur shut his eyes in prayer and then said, My Lord Shiva has kept my treasures safe. Come, we must build a raft in which you can bring ashore what I dive for. With 50 skilled men, that was quickly accomplished. Soon, so many parcels, carefully wrapped in oilskins, lay in a pile beside the lake. Maya would not allow anyone to undo these and look inside. Most of them shone even by the light of the day, as if they were cold fires burning within. Some of the parcels were so heavy, though small enough, that it took 3 men to carry a single one. When Maya had retrieved the last of the parcels, they set off down the mountain, not far from the lake, along the loftiest section of a mountain trail. The chariots from Indraprastha waited. Leading these with the treasures of Tripur, Maya and his party rode home. The Asur's eyes shone with memories of the days when he had been a king of his people. Back in Indraprastha, Maya had his treasures carried safely to the dome of secrecy that covered his growing Sabha. To no one did he yet show what was in those parcels, which had lain for an age in a jade cavern under the Bindu Saras. Just one of them he brought into Yudhishthir's palace, to Arjun's chambers. Maya called Bhim and Arjun there. As he untied that large parcel, the Asur was smiling, as he so seldom did. When he had peeled away the rough oilskin, the Pandavas saw an emerald and saffron silken layer inside. The cloth was so rich, they had never seen its like. When Maya undid the silk as well and laid the package bare, Bhim and Arjun rose in awe to stare at what lay within. Delighted that the princes were enchanted, Maya picked up the shining mace he had uncovered. Its knobs were golden, its haft jeweled, and with the Asurs hefted it, it rumbled like a thundercloud. This was no common gada, but a weapon as old and powerful as the Gandhiv. Giving that mace gravely to Bhim, Maya said, "May you be invincible in every battle you fight. May you kill your greatest enemy with this gada one day." When Bhim received the weapon, it was alive in his hands. He felt its implacable spirit touch him. Maya turned to the battle conch, the shank that lay on the silk cloth, its presence filling the room. The Asur held the old shell out to Arjun and said, as if it were an old and valued friend, "This is the Devdatta. When you sound him, not just your enemies, but the earth will tremble, for he is a great spirit of the ocean." Arjun embraced Maya emotionally. "I was the lucky one on the day we met." Now Maya began to give his Sabha its final touches. Night and day he toiled, obsessed that his creation should be perfect. In a tide of visions, intricate plans came to him under the lofty dome that still shrouded the great court. At last, after 14 months of ceaseless labor, one night Maya came to Yudhishthir and said, "Your Sabha is ready. I will dismantle the covering dome tonight, and you may see it in the morning. I have consulted Dhaumya. Tomorrow is an auspicious day." When the sun rose the next morning, a gleaming miracle stood revealed before the palace of Indraprastha. Guided by 8,000 stone kinkars, Maya's edifice had columns of gold and silver, terraces of crystal, and the Pandavas knew it was by far the most magnificent Sabha in the world. It made every other royal court on earth seem like stalls beside a great temple. Why? Maya Sabha made even the rest of the fabulous Indraprastha seem ordinary. It was ensconced in sprawling gardens in which flowers of every kind, Kalhar, Madhvi, Malika, Korvak, Kadamba, among others, bloomed all together, many unseasonally, as if the Sabha was part of a transcendent realm. Enchantment lay upon every part of it. Pools full of ethereally clear water dotted the gardens. As Maya led Yudhishthir and his brothers around, they saw these pools had floors and banks of blemishlessly white marble. The marble banks were set with clusters of pearl, and flights of crystal steps led down to the water. In the water were lotuses made of jewels, some of them solitaires as big as doves' eggs. Among these were real lotuses, fish, tortoise, and water birds. At the lofty doors to the Sabha itself, as Maya led them in, after the chanting of sacred mantras, was another pool. This was inlaid with precious stones exactly like the rest of the floor. By a trick of the light that fell on it, the water in the pool reflected the marble of the ceiling so perfectly that at first the Pandavas mistook it for solid floor. Yudhishthir nearly stepped into it, and Maya drew him back. The spectacular central hall of the Sabha was elegant as a work of nature. Surrounded by countless little terraces, it was lamented with jewel light, deep emerald and rubies, scintillating sapphire and diamond. Dusky coral, mystic amethyst, cristoberyl, and moonstone, and other gems no longer found in the world, secret stones set in the walls, ceilings, and floors. All you saw was their light, never the stones themselves, unless you inspected the crevices in which they were craftily embedded. At the head of the Sabha, which was 6,000 cubits square, was a raised marble platform. On this dais were 5 crystal and golden thrones encrusted with the most exceptional and auspicious gemstones. These thrones were perhaps the finest reflections of Maya's imagination. Each one was different from the others, and each created for a particular Pandav prince. Maya said, "Do you know which throne is for each of you?" Yudhishthir's throne was obviously the biggest one, in the center of the platform. But with no hesitation, the other princes followed Yudhishthir onto the dais, and each one sat in his own throne. Maya cried in delight. So there was no mistake. There were 1,000 other marvels in that Sabha, and even the Pandavas who had lived in the grandeur of Hastinapur and the splendor of Indraprastha were awed by it. Charming little passages led away from the main hall to numberless smaller halls and atriums. There were other rooms for study and recreation, and up marble and wooden flights of stairs were elaborate apartments for each Pandav's relaxation and pleasure. Maya's Sabha could easily serve as another palace in Indraprastha. The outer walls were so sensitive to light, the Sabha seemed like an entirely different edifice at different times of day. The people would say that in the evening you would not recognize it for being the same court it had been at dawn. And on the night of a full moon, it seemed to float on air and surely to belong to another supernatural world. Yudhishthir turned to the Asur and pointing to him said, "Now we can begin to imagine how glorious the Tripur must have been and why its legend has survived the passage of ages." Knowing this was the highest praise he could have, Maya also bowed. He said, "The Lord of Indraprastha deserves no less. If you are pleased, I am satisfied." He could say they were more than pleased. They were entranced by his creation. None of them yet realized what envy it would stir in some hearts, and that envy would catalyze the greatest war. Yudhishthir and his brothers wandered around the Sabha for hours, as if they could never have their fill of it. The next day there was a feast to celebrate its completion. The poor were fed, gifts and gold given to them. Maya came to Yudhishthir and said, "My work here is complete. I must return to my family." Yudhishthir took him back to the palace, knowing the habitually solitary Asur would want to leave Indraprastha as soon as he had finished his task. The Pandav king already had several gifts ready for him. At first, Maya was reluctant to accept any of them, saying they owed him nothing. It had been his privilege to build the Sabha. However, the Pandav would not hear of this, and finally Maya left Indraprastha, laden with treasures for himself and his family. Many of these were heirlooms fashioned in Devlok and handed down the Kuru generations from sires of old. Each Pandav came and embraced the Asur, and they wept when he left Indraprastha. Though Maya was a taciturn and essentially lone being, he had won their hearts with his generosity and his genius. Engraved on a fine silver sword, Yudhishthir gave him were the words, "To the greatest builder of all." Arjun went beyond the gates of Indraprastha to Maya on his way. Suddenly the Asur had tears in his eyes as he grasped the Arjun's hands. "May your life always be filled with the sweetness. I will never forget you, noble prince, for that you saved my life." Arjun's eyes were full. "I will think of you whenever I see your Sabha and when I ride into the battle, taking my life in my hands. I will think of you when I blow on the Devdat to strike fear in my enemies." They embraced, and the quiet Asur turned and walked out of Arjun's life. The Pandav never asked where he was going. If Maya had wanted Arjun to know, he would have told him. A few weeks after Maya left Indraprastha, Yudhishthir and his brothers held a banquet in the new Sabha, to which Kshatriyas from other kingdoms were invited. Those who came said that truly Indraprastha, with a jewel at its heart, the Maya Sabha, was no less than Indra's Amravati in Devlok. The fame of the city in the wilderness spread throughout Aryavrat, and especially of the court Maya had built. All the kings of the earth came to see the wonderful Sabha, except Dhritarashtra and his sons. It was like a slap in the blind king's face. He had sent his nephews into a desert thinking he would consign them to oblivion Now the renown of Indraprastha was greater than that of Hastinapur. The desert had bloomed, and the Maya Sabha was the crowning humiliation for the Kauravas. Dhritarashtra and his sons could hardly bear the envy that burned them. Not only kings, but holy seers from the tallest mountains and the deepest jungles came to see Maya Sabha. Many young Kshatriyas who came with their fathers remained behind in Indraprastha to study archery with Arjun. One of the finest of these were Satyaki, Krishn's cousin from Dwarka. Chitrasen and Chitrangad came to Indraprastha with Arjun's son Babu Vahan. They were welcomed and stayed for some months. It was a time of plenty, a time of fortune, a time with Indraprastha with a vibrant center of activity and learning. The Pandav's cup of joy brimmed over. Subhadra gave birth to a splendid son whose arms were long, his chest broad, and his eyes as large as bulls. They named him Abhimanyu. He was a brilliant child and quickly became his uncle's favorite. In course of time, Draupadi too had 5 sons, one from each of her husbands. Yudhishthir's boy was Prativindya, Bhim's was Sud Soma, Arjun's Shrutkarma, Nakul's son was Stanika, and Sahadev's prince was Shrutsen. Those were halcyon years. The dark and anxious days of the lacquer palace were forgotten. The furtive months of the jungle and Ek Chakra where they ate by begging alms. It seemed destiny smiled on the sons of Pandu and their worst days were behind them. But darkness and misfortune, the soul makers of this world, were gathering themselves once more below time's apparently secure horizon. Surrounded by every luxury and protected by the most powerful army and allies on earth, the Pandavas would not have dreamt they would soon be homeless wanderers in the wide world again, exiles from their wonderful city. Meanwhile, the wheel of fortune turned towards its very zenith. The advent once more of Narad Muni in Indraprastha was to begin this final ascendancy. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnameva Visheshyate Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.